Okay, so what if an oppressor's punishment isn't something that just waits for the afterlife? What if it's a fire they carry inside them right now, every single day? That's the core idea we're going to unpack today. We're diving into a really powerful sermon by Mawlana Sheikh Muhammad Adil al-Rabbani that totally reframes how we might think about mercy, oppression, and divine justice. It's a fascinating take, so let's get into it. So, right off the bat, the sermon hits us with this foundational quote from the Qur'an. And it's so important because it immediately sets the stage. It connects these two huge virtues, patience and mercy, directly to getting into paradise. And you can tell this isn't just, a gentle suggestion. It's being laid out as the absolute blueprint for those who are considered the dwellers of paradise. All right, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We've got 5 main parts. First up, we'll look at the promise that comes with patience and mercy. Then we'll shift gears and see how the sermon sees the world today. After that, we get to that really interesting idea of the oppressor's inner fire. We'll contrast that with the believer's final reward, and then we'll wrap it all up by looking at these 2 totally different paths and where they lead. Okay, so section 1. Let's start with the ideal. What does it mean to be a true believer according to this sermon? Well, it's not just about, a checklist of good deeds. It goes deeper. It's about painting a picture of the core spiritual DNA, really, that defines a believer. And it draws a very clear line in the sand between 2 kinds of people. And here's where it gets really clear. Look at this breakdown. The sermon presents this as a direct cause and effect. Being merciful, that's not just a nice thing to do. It's presented as a defining trait of a good Muslim, something that gets you love and mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means the exalted. But the flip side is just as direct. Being unmerciful, well, that's a path that leads to punishment. It's this black and white contrast that really forms the moral backbone of the whole sermon. All right, so we've seen the ideal. Now, the sermon takes a sharp turn and looks at the world as it is today. And, well, the picture it paints is pretty bleak. Let's get into the sermon's diagnosis of our current reality. So, according to the source, there's a specific moment in history that changed everything. It points to the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate as this huge turning point. The claim is that ever since then, oppression has just exploded across the world, reaching levels it had never seen before. And this really breaks it down to the individual level. A Muslim is described with these core traits: merciful, compassionate, someone who encourages patience in others. But a disbeliever, well, they're described as the exact opposite. Not just someone who does oppressive things, but someone who actually possesses oppression as a core trait. Okay, and this brings us to what I think is one of the most powerful ideas in the whole sermon. This idea that divine justice isn't something you have to wait for. Nope. The argument here is that for the oppressor, the punishment starts right here, in this life. Now, to really get this, we need to know a key term they use: dunya. It's pretty straightforward. It just means this world, this life, the one we're living right now. And that's crucial because the whole point is that justice isn't just for later. It starts right here, in the dunya. So here's the kicker. The punishment in this life, it isn't something on the outside. It's internal. The sermon calls it an inner fire that just burns away inside the oppressor, making them totally restless. It's this deep, constant spiritual or even psychological torment that they can never, ever shake. And get this. There's no escape. The sermon says the oppressor tries everything to put out this fire. They turn to distractions, right? Things like alcohol, drugs, anything to try and get some peace. But it's a completely useless cycle. Nothing works. Those things give them zero relief. That inner fire, it's unquenchable. Okay, so we've talked about the oppressor. Now let's flip the coin. What about the believer? What about the person who's on the receiving end of all this oppression? Well, as you can imagine, the sermon presents a totally different story for them. And for this, we need our second key term, the hereafter. So this is the life that comes after death. It's where the final judgment happens. And for the believer who had to endure all that hardship, this is where they get their ultimate reward. This is such a powerful way to reframe suffering, isn't it? The sermon claims that for a believer, everything that happens to them in this life, even something as terrible as oppression, is actually, in the grand scheme of things, for their own good. It's a benefit that they'll fully understand and receive in the hereafter. And just listen to this quote. It really drives home just how huge that reward is supposed to be. The idea is that in the hereafter, when people see the reward given to those who were patient through suffering, they'll actually say, wow, if only we had suffered like that too. It just goes to show that the compensation is seen as so much greater than the pain they went through.
All right, let's put it all together. We've seen the two sides, so let's do a final comparison and look at these two completely different paths and where they end up.
So here it is, laid out side by side. You've got the oppressor, restless with that inner fire in this world, and then facing a final reckoning in the next. And then you have the believer. Everything that happens to them here is for their benefit, and in the hereafter, they're rewarded for everything they endured. It's just two totally different journeys with two completely different destinations.
And the sermon doesn't end with some big, loud command. It ends with a prayer, a really humble one. It brings everything from this big theological idea right down to a personal level. And that phrase, Inshallah Allah, which means if God wills, just shows that humility. It's about asking for help to stay on the right path. So, what does this all leave us with? Well, a pretty deep question, actually. The sermon describes justice as more than just a final verdict, right? It's an experience, that inner fire for the oppressor and that ultimate reward for the believer. So it makes you wonder, what really defines justice? Is it the inner state we live with every day, or is it the final fate we receive at the end? Definitely something to chew on.